The sprawling, undulating terrain is all of Ake. More than mere loyalty to the parsonage gave birth to a puzzle and a resentment that God should choose to look down on H's own pious station, the parsonage compound, from the profane heights of Latoko. There was, of course, the mystery of the chief's stable with live horses near the crest of the hill, but beyond that, this dizzying road only sheered upwards from one noisy market to the other, looking down across El Barapa and Ita Ake into the most secret recesses of the parsonage itself. On a misty day, the steep rise towards El Toko would join the sky. If God did not actually live there was little doubt that he descended first on its crest, then took his one gigantic stride over those babbling markets which dared to sell ale on Sundays into St. Peter's Church, afterwards visiting the parsonage for tea with the canon. There was the small consolation that, in spite of the temptation to arrive on horseback, he never stopped first at the chief's, who was known to be a pagan. Certainly the chief was never seen at a church service except at the anniversaries of the Alake's coronation. Instead, God strode straight into St. Peter's for morning service, paused briefly at the afternoon service, but reserved his most formal exotic presence for the evening service which, in his honor, was always held in the English tongue. The organ took on a dark, smoky sonority at evening service, and there was no doubt that the organ was adapting IT's normal sounds to accompany God's own sepulchral responses, with its timbre of the Igung FM, to those prayers that were offered to him. Only the canon's residence could have housed the weekly guest. For one thing, it was the only story building in the parsonage, square and stolid as the canon himself, riddled with black wooden-framed windows. Bishop's Court was also a story building, but only pupils lived in it, so it was not a house. From the upper floor of the ancestral masquerade, Canon's home, one almost looked the top of LT Sixco straight in its pagan eye. It stood at the highest lived-in point of the parsonage, just sing overlooking the gate. Its back was turned to the world of spirits and gomids who inhabited the thick woods and chased home children who had wandered too deeply in them for firewood, mushrooms and snails. The canon's square white building was a bulwark against the menace and the siege of the wood spirits. Its rear wall demarcated their territory, stopped them from taking liberties with the world of humans. Only the schoolrooms of the primary school shared this closeness to the woods, and they were empty at night, fenced by rough-plastered walls, by the windowless rear walls of ITE's houses, by tumuli of rocks which the giant trees tried vainly to obscure. Ake parsonage with its corrugated roofs gave off an air of fortifications. Secure within it, we descended or climbed at will into overlapping, interleaved plains, sheer rock-faced drops, undergrowths and sudden hideouts of cultivated fruit groves. The hibiscus was rampant. The air hung heavy with the perfumes of lemon leaves, guavas, mangoes, sticky with the sap of boom boom and the secretions of the rain tree. The school compounds were lined with these rain trees with widespread shade, filled branches. Needle pines rose above the acacia, and forests of bamboos kept us permanently nervous. If monster snakes had a choice, the bamboo clumps would be their ideal habitation. Between the left flank of the canon's house and the school, playing fields was the orchard. It was too varied, much too profuse to be called a garden, even a fruit garden. And there were plants and fruits in it which made the orchard an extension of scripture classes, church lessons or sermons. A leaf plant, mottled white and red, was called the Cana lily. As Christ was nailed to the cross and his wounds spurted blood, a few drops stuck to the leaves of the lily, stigmatizing it forever. No one bothered to explain the cause of the abundant white spots, which also appeared on every leaf. Perhaps it had to do with the washing of sins in the blood of Christ, leaving even the most mottled spots in a person's soul snow white. There was the passion fruit also, born of another part of that same history, not however a favorite of any of us children. Its lush green skin was pleasant to fondle in one's palm, but it ripened into a desiccated yellow, collapsing like the faces of the old men and women we knew, and it barely managed to be sweet, thus failing the infallible test of a real fruit. But the queen of the orchard was the pomegranate which grew, nor so much from a seed of the stone church as of the lyrical Sunday school, for it was at the Sunday school that the real stories were told, stories that lived in the events themselves, crossed the time border of Sundays or leaves of the Bible, and entered the world of fabled lands. Men and women. The pomegranate was most niggardly in producing. It yielded its outwardly hardy fruit only once in a wattier isle. Tended with patience by the thick-veined hands and face, which belonged to someone we only knew as gardener. Only gardener could be trusted to share the occasional fruit among the small, dedicated band of pomegranate watchers, yet even the tiniest. Wedge transported us to the illustrated world of the biblical tales retold. The pomegranate was the queen of Sheba, rebellions and wars, the passion of Salome, the siege of Troy, the praise of beauty in the Song of Solomon. This fruit, with its stone-hearted look and feel, unlocked the cellars of Ali Baba, extracted the genie from Aladdin's lamp, plucked the strings of the harp that restored David to sanity, parted the waters of the Nile, and filled our parsonage with incense from the dim temple of Jerusalem. It grew only in the orchard, Gardner said. The pomegranate was foreign to the black man's soil, but some previous bishop, a white man, had brought the seeds and planted them in the orchard. We asked if it was the apple, but Gardner only laughed and said no. Nor, he added, would that apple be found on the black man's soil. Gardner was adjudged ignorant. It was clear that only the pomegranate could be the apple that lost Adam and Eve the joys of paradise. There existed yet another fruit. That was locally called apple, soft yet crisp, a soft pink skin and reasonably juicy. Before the advent of the pomegranate, it had assumed the identity of the apple that undid the naked pear. The first taste of the pomegranate unmasked that impostor and took its place. Swarms of bats inhabited the fig tree, their seed-pocked droppings would cake the stones, lawns, paths, and bushes before dawn. An evergreen tree, soft and rampant, bordered the playing field on the side of the bookseller's compound, defying the harmattan. It filled the parsonage with a tireless concert of weaver birds. An evil thing has happened to Ake Parsonage. The land is eroded. The lawns are bared and mystery-driven from its once secretive combs. Once, each new day opened up an unseen closure, a pocket of rocks, a clump of bush, and a colony of snails. The motor hulk has not moved from its staging point, where children clambered into it for journeys to fabled places. Now it is only a derelict. Its eyes rusted sockets, its dragon face collapsed with a progressive loss of teeth. The abandoned Inchy narrator, with its lush weeds and glistening snakes, is marked by a mound of mud. The surviving houses which formed the battlements of Ake Parsonage, are now packing cases on a depleted landscape, full of creaks, exposed and nerveless, and the moods are gone. Even the open lawns and broad paths, bordered with whitewashed stones, lilies and lemongrass dumps, change nature from season to caisson, from weekday to Sunday and between noon and nightfall. And the echoes off the walls in Lower Parsonage acquired new tonalities with the seasons, changed with the emptying of the lawns as the schools dispersed for holidays. If I lay across the lawn before our house, face upwards to the sky, my head towards Bishop's Court, each spread-out leg would point to the inner compounds of Lower Parsonage. Half of the Anglican girls' school occupied one of these lower spaces. The other half had taken over Bishop's Court. The lower area contained the school's junior classrooms, a dormitory, a mall fruit garden of pawpaws, guava, some bamboo and wild undergrowth. There were always snails to be found in the rainy season. In the other lower compound was the mission booksell, a shrivel-led man with a serene wife on whose ample back we all at one time or the other slept, or reviewed the world. His compound became a short-cut to the road that led to Ibarra, Lefenwa or Ilgbain, and its grammar school over which Ransom Kuti presided and lived with his family. The bookseller's compound Kontai Ned the only well in the parsonage. In the dry season, his place was never empty, and his soil appeared to produce the only coconut trees. Bishop's Court of Upper Parsonage is no more. Bishop Ajayi Crowther would sometimes emerge from the duster of hydrangea and bougainvillea, a gnomic face with popping eyes whose formal photograph had first stared at us from the frontispiece of his life history. He had lived, the teacher said, in Bishop's Court, and from that moment he peered out from among the creeping plants whenever I passed by the house on an errand to our G-Reet aunt, Mrs. Lijadu. Bishop's Court had become a boarding house for the girls' school and an extra playground for us during the holy days. The bishop sat silently on the bench beneath the wooden porch over the entrance, his robes twined through and through with the lengthening tendrils of the bougainvillea. I moved closer, when his eyes turned to sockets. My mind wandered then to another photograph in which he wore a clerical suit with waistcoat, and I wondered what he really kept at the end of the silver chain that vanished into the pocket. He grinned and said, "Come nearer, I'll show you." As I moved towards the porch, he drew on the chain until he had lifted out a wholly round pocket watch that gleamed of solid silver. He pressed a button, and the lid opened, revealing not the glass and the face dial, but a deep, cloud-filled space. Then he winked one eye, and it fell from his face into the bowl of the watch. He winked the other, and this joined its partner in the watch. He snapped back the lid, nodded again, and his head went bald. His teeth disappeared, and the skin pulled backward till the whitened cheekbones were exposed. Then he stood up, and tucking the watch back into the waistcoat pocket, moved a step towards me. I fled homewards. Bishop's Court appeared sometimes to want to rival the canon's house. It looked a houseboat, despite its guard of whitewashed stones and luxuriant flowers, its wooden fretwork frontage almost wholly immersed in bougainvillea. And it was shadowed also by those omnipresent rocks, from whose clefts Tal El, stout bold, trees miraculously grew. Clouds gathered, and the rocks merged into their accustomed grey turbulence. Then the trees were carried to and fro until they stayed suspended over Bishop's Court. This happened only in heavy storms. Bishop's Court, unlike the canon's house, did not actually border the rocks or the woods. The girls' playing fields separated them, and we knew that this buffer had always been there. Obviously, bishops were not inclined to challenge the spirits. Only the vicars could. That Bishop Ajayi Crowther frightened me out of that compound by his strange transformations only confirmed that the bishops, once they were dead, joined the world of spirits and ghosts. I could not see the canon decaying like that in front of my eyes, nor the Rev J.J. who had once occupied that house, many years before, when my mother was heiress till Elikas. J.J. Ransom Kuti had actually ordered back several gomids in his lifetime. My mother confirmed it. She was his grand-niece, and before she came to live at our house, she had lived in the Rev J.J.'s household. Her brother Sanya also lived there, and he was acknowledged by all to be an Oro, which made him at home in the woods, even at night, on one a kind of tree demon. Occasion, however, he must have gone too far. They had visited us before, she said, it to complain. Mind you, they wouldn't actually come into the compound. They stood far off at the edge, where the woods ended. Their leader, the one who spoke, emitted wild sparks from a head that seemed to be an entire ball of embers. No, I'm mixing up two occasions. That was the second time when he chased us home. The first time, they had merely sent an emissary. He was quite dark, short and swarthy. He came right to the backyard and stood there while he ordered us to call the Reverend. It was as if Uncle had been expecting the visit. He came out of the house and asked him what he wanted. We all huddled, in the kitchen, peeping out. What was his voice like? Did he speak like an Igungun? I'm coming to it. This man, well, I suppose one should call him a man. He wasn't quite human, we could see that, much too large a head, and he kept his eyes on the ground. So he said he had come to report us. They didn't mind our coming to the woods even at night, but we were to stay off any area beyond the rocks and that clump of bamboo by the stream. Well, what did Uncle say? And you haven't said what his voice was like. Tinu turned her elder sister's eye on me. Let Mama finish the story. You want to know everything. All right. He spoke just like your father. Are you satisfied? I did not believe that, but I let it pass. Goon, what did Granduncle do? He called everyone together and warned us to keep away from the place. And yet you went back. Well, you know your Uncle Sanya. He was angry. For one thing, the best snails are on the other side of that stream, so he continued to complain that those Oro were just being selfish and he was going to show them who he was. Well, he did. About a week later, he led us back. And he was right, you know. We gathered a full basket and a half of the biggest snails you ever saw. Well, by this time we had all forgotten about the warning. There was plenty of moonlight, and anyway, I've told you Sanya is an Oro H himself. But why? He looks normal like you and us. You won't understand yet. Anyway, he is Oro, so with him we felt quite safe, until suddenly this sort of light, like a ball of fire, began to glow in the distance. Even while it was still far, we kept hearing voices, as if a lot of people around us were grumbling the same words together. They were saying something like, "You stubborn, stiff-necked children, we've warned you and warned you, but you just won't listen." Wild Christian looked above, our heads frowning to recollect the better. One cannot even say they. It was only this figure of fire that I saw, and he was still very distant. Yet I heard him distinctly, as if he had many mouths which were pressed against my ears. Every moment the fireball loomed larger and larger. What did Uncle Sanya do? Did he fight him? Sanya Woniyen, he was the first to break and run. No one remembered all those fat snails that Iwinai followed us all the way to the house. Our screams had arrived long before us, and the whole household was, well, you can imagine the turmoil. Uncle had already dashed. The period of faith is gone. There was faith among our early Christians, real faith, not just church-going and hymn-singing. Faith, LG Bag B6. And it is out of that faith that real power comes. UNACLA stood there like a rock. He held out his Bible and ordered, go back to that forest which is your home back, I said, in the name of God. And that was it. The creature simply turned and fled, those sparks falling off faster and faster, until there was just a faint glow receding into the woods. She sighed. Of course. After prayers that evening, there was the price to be paid. 6 of the best on. Everyone's back. Sanya got 12. And we all cut grass every day for the next week. I could not help feeling that the fright should have sufficed as punishment, her eyes gazing in the direction of the square house. Wild Christian, nonetheless, appeared to sense what was going on in my mind. She added, faith and discipline, that is what made those early Bel-Ievers. Pshia, God doesn't make them like that anymore. When I think of that one who now occupies that house. Then she appeared to recall herself to our presence. What? Are you both still sitting here for? Isn't it time for your evening bath, Lawanli? Auntie Lawanli, replied Ma from a distant part of the house. Before she appeared, I reminded Wild Christian, but you haven't told us why Uncle Sanya is Oro. She shrugged. He is. I saw it with my own eyes. We both clamored. When? When? She smiled. You won't understand, but I'll tell you about it some other time, or let him tell you himself next time he is here. You mean you saw him turn into an Oro? Lawanli came in just then, and she prepared to hand us over. Isn't it time for these children's bath? I pleaded. No, wait, Auntie Lawanli. Knowing it was a waste of time, she had already gripped us both, one arm each. I shouted back, was Bishop Crowther an Oro? Wild Christian laughed. What next are you going to ask? Oh, I see, they have taught you about him in Sunday school, have they? I saw him. I led back at the door, forcing Lawanli to stop. I see him all the time. He comes and sits under the porch of the girls' school. I've seen him when crossing the compound to Auntie Mrs. Liadu. All right, sighed Wild Christian. Go and have your bath. He hides among the bougainville layer. Lawanli dragged me out of hearing. Later that evening, she told us the rest of the story. On that occasion, Rev JJ was away on one of his many mission tours. He traveled a lot, on foot and on bicycle, keeping in touch with all the branches of his diocese and spreading the word of God. There was frequent opposition, but nothing deterred him. One frightening experience occurred in one of the villages in Liebu. He had been warned not to preach on a particular day, which was the day for an Igungun outing, but he persisted and held a service. The Igungun procession passed while the service was in progress, and using his ancestral voice, Cal led on the preacher to stop at once, disperse his people and come out to pay obeisance. Rev JJ ignored him. The Igungun then left, taking his followers with him, but, on passing the main door, he tapped on it with his wand 3 times. Hardly had the last member of his procession left the church premises than the building collapsed. The walls simply fell down and the roof disintegrated. Miraculously, however, the walls fell outwards while the roof supports fell among the aisles or flew outwards, anywhere but on the congregation itself. Rev JJ calmed the worshippers, paused in his preaching to render a thanksgiving prayer, then continued his sermon. Perhaps this was what Wild Christian meant by faith, and this tended to confuse things because, after all, the Egyngian did make the church building collapse. Wild Christian made no attempt to explain how that happened, so that feat tended to be of the same order of faith, which moved mountains or enabled Wild Christian to pour groundnut oil from a broad-rimmed bowl into an empty bottle without spilling. A drop. She had the strange habit of sighing with a kind of rapture, crediting her steadiness of hand to faith and thanking God. If, however, the basin slipped and she lost a drop or two, she murmured that her sins had become heavy and that she needed to pray more. If Rev J.J. had faith, however, he also appeared to have stubbornness in common with our Uncle Sanya. Stubbornness was one of the earliest sins we easily recognized, and no matter how much Wild Christian tried to explain the Rev J.J. preaching on the Egyngians' outing day, despite warnings, it sounded much like stubbornness. As for Uncle Sanya, there was no doubt about his own case. Hardly did the Rev J.J. pedal out of sight on his pastoral duties than he was off into the woods on one pretext or the other, and making for the very areas which the Oro had declared out of bounds. Mushrooms and snails were the real goals, with the gathering of firewood used as the dutiful excuse. Even Sanya had, however, stopped venturing into the woods at night, accepting the fact that it was far too risky. Daytime and early dusk carried little danger, as most wood spirits only came out at night. Mother told us that on this occasion she and Sanya had been picking mushrooms, separated by only a few clumps of bushes. She could hear his movements quite clearly. Indeed, they took the precaution of staying very close together. Suddenly, she said, she heard Sanya's voice talking animatedly with someone. After listening for some time, she called out his name, but he did not respond. There was no voice apart from his, yet he appeared to be chatting in friendly, excited tones with some other person. So she peeped through the bushes, and there was Uncle San Y, seated on the ground, chattering away to no one that she could see. She tried to penetrate the surrounding bushes with her gaze, but the woods remained empty except for the two of them, and then her eyes came to rest on his basket. It was something she had observed before, she said. It was the same, no matter how many of the children in the household went to gather snails, berries, or whatever. Sanya would spend most of the time playing and climbing rocks and trees. He would wander off by himself, leaving his basket anywhere. And yet, whenever they prepared to return home, his basket was always fuller than the others. This time was no different. She came closer, startling our Uncle Weight Zero snapped off his chatter and pretended to be hunting snails in the undergrowth. Mother said that she was frightened. The basket was filled to the brim, impossibly bursting. She was also discouraged, so she picked up her near-empty basket and insisted that they return home at once. She led the way, but after some distance, when she looked back, Sanya appeared to be trying to follow her but was being prevented, as if he was being led back by invisible hands. From time to time, he would snatch forward his arm and snap, "Leave me alone. Can't you see I have—" "To go home?" I said. "I have to go." She broke into a run, and Sanya did the same. They ran all the way home. That evening, Sanya took ill. He broke into a sweat, tossed on his mat all night and muttered to himself. By the full lowing day, the household was thoroughly frightened. His forehead was burning to the touch, and no one could get a coherent word out of him. Finally, an elderly woman, one of JJ's converts, turned up at the house on a routine visit. When she learnt of Sanya's condition, she nodded wisely and acted like one who knew exactly what to do. Having first phoned out what things he last did before his illness, she summoned my mother and questioned her. She told her everything while the old woman kept on nodding with understanding. Then she gave instructions. "I want a basket of ligidi, containing 50 wraps. Then prepare some ikuru in a large bowl. Make sure the ikuru stew is prepared with plenty of locust bean and crayfish. It must smell as appetizing as possible." The children were dispersed in various directions, some to the market to obtain the AGLDI, others to begin grinding the beans for the amount of ikuru which was needed to accompany 50 wraps of agidi. The children's mouths watered, assuming at once that this was to be an appeasement feast, a sara for some offended spirits. When all was prepared, however, The old woman took everything to Sanya's sick room, plus a pot of cold water and cups, locked tile door on him, and ordered everybody away. Just go about your normal business and don't go anywhere near the room. If you want your brother to recover, do as I say. Don't attempt to speak to him and do not peep through the keyhole. She locked the Wiendaos too and went herself to a distant end of the courtyard where she could monitor the movements of the children. She dozed off soon after, however, so that mother and the other children were able to glut their ears to the door and windows, even if they could not see the invalid himself. Uncle Sanya sounded as if he was no longer alone. They heard him saying things like, "You behave yourself. There is enough for everybody. All right, you take this, have an extra wrap. Open you our mouth. Here, you don't have to fight over that bit. Here's another peaked of crayfish. Behave," I said. And they would hear what sounded like the slapping of wrists, a scrape of dishes on the ground, or water slopping into a cup. When the woman judged it was time, which was well after dusk, nearly 6 hours after Sanya was first locked up, he went and opened the door. There was Sanya fast asleep, but this time very peacefully. She touched his forehead and appeared to be satisfied by the chant. The household who had crowded in with her had no interest in Sanya, however. All they could see, with astonished faces, were the scattered leaves of 50 wraps of agidi with the contents gone. A large empty dish, which was earlier filed with hairkuru, and a water pot nearly empty. No, there was no question about it. Our Uncle Sanya was an Oro. Wild Christian had seen and heard proof of it many times over. His companions were obviously the more benevolent type, or he would have come to serious harm on more than one occasion. His protecting faith notwithstanding, Unda Sanya was very rarely with us at this time, so we could not ask him any of the questions which Wild Christian refused co-answer when he next visited us at the parsonage. I noticed his mange eyes, which hardly ever seemed to blink, but looked straight over our heads even when he talked Roas. But he seemed far too active to be an Oro. Indeed, for a long time I confused him with a local scoutmaster who was nicknamed Activity. So I began to watch the wolf cubs who seemed nearest to the kind of secret company which our Uncle Sanya may have kept as a child. As their tight little faces formed circles on the lawns of Ake, building little fires, exchanging secret signs with hyods and twigs, with stones specially placed against one another during their jamboree, I felt I had detected the hidden companions, who crept in unseen through chinks in the door, and even from the ground right under the aggrieved noses of Wild Christian and the other children in J. Prem's household, and feasted on 50 wraps of agidi and a huge bowl of ikuru. The emission left, the parsonage just a vicar and his catechist. Haki was no longer worth a bishop. But even the vicar's QRT is a mere shell of itself. The orchard has vanished, the rows of lemongrass have long been eaten by goats. Lemongrass, the cure of fevers and headaches, an aspirin or two, a cup of hot lemongrass tea in bed. But IT's effusion was really fragrant, and we drank it normally as a variant of the common tea. Stark, shrunk with time, is that white square monument which, framed against the rocks, dominated the parsonage, focusing the eye on itself as a visitor entered the parsonage gate. The master of that house was a chunk from those rocks, black, huge, granite head and enormous feet. Mostly they called him pastor, or vicar, canon, reverend, or like my mother, simply pa de lumo. Father's choice was canon, and this also became my own, but only because of a visit to Ibarra. We made several of those outings, visit to relations, accompanying Wild Christian on her shopping expeditions, or for some other purpose which we could never grasp. At the end of such outings, however, we were left with a vague notion of having been taken out to see something, to experience something. We were left with exhilaration and, of course, exhaustion, since we walked most of the way. But sometimes it was difficult to recall what concrete things we had seen, what had been the purpose of our setting out, specially dressed and neatly combed, and with much bustle and preparation. We had climbed a steep road and come on the imposing entrance, the white pillars and plaque which said, "The Residency." Some white man clearly lived there. The gate was patrolled by a policeman in baggy shawls who stared over our heads. The house, I self, was set well back up a hill, part hidden by trees. But the objects on which my eyes were fastened were two black, heavy-snouted tubes mounted on wooden wheels. They stood against the pillars, pointed at us, and beside each one was a pile of round metallic balls nearly as big as footballs. "They are guns," my mother said. "They are called cannons, and they are used to fight wars." "But why does Papa call Pas de Lumeau a cannon?" She explained the difference, but I had already found my own answer. It was the head. Pas de Lumeau's head was Moore. Ike a cannonball, that was why Father called him Cannon. Everything about the guns recalled the man's presence, his strength and solidity. The cannons looked immobile, indestructible, and so did he. He seemed to overwhelm everything. When he came to visit us, he filled the front room completely. Only the parlor appeared to suit him. Once he was sunk in one of the armchairs, he became easier to contain. I felt sorry for his catechists, junior vicar or curate. His assistants seemed to have different names also. They appeared insipid, starved parodies of himself, so seemingly poor in spirit that I would later think of them as church mice. Of the men who came to our house wearing a round collar, only our Uncle Ransom Cootie, whom everyone called Dowdoo, matched and even exceeded his personality. Pas de Lumeau's presence awed me. Essay's favourite position in all arguments was the devil's advocate. He was called S.A. from his initials, H.M. or headmaster, or S.I.Show, by his more rumbustious friends. For some reason, few called him by his own name, and, for a long time, I wondered if he had any. It did not take long for him to enter my consciousness simply as essay, as one of those careful stylistic exercises in prose which follow set rules of composition. Our products of fastidiousness and elegance, set down in beautiful calligraphy that would be the envy of most copyists of any age. His despair was real that he should give birth to a son who, from the beginning, showed clearly that he had inherited nothing of his own handwriting. He displayed the same elegance in his dressing. His eating habits were a source of marvel to Mother, who by contrast I soon named the Wild Christian. When Essay dissected a piece of yam, weighed it carefully, transferred it to his plate, paused, turned it around, sliced off a piece and returned it to the dish, then commenced the same ritual with the meat and stew, she would shake her head and ask, "Does rar extra piece really mara?" Essay merely, "Semilid," proceeded row chew methodically, slicing off each piece of meat, yam, like a geometric exercise, lifting a scoop of srewari edge of H's knife, and plastering resell ice of yam like a master mason. He never drank between mouthfuls, nor even a sip. Our debate rhyme, however. He soon grew as excitable as Rai Buxel Lair, shrillest of Remol with his tiny twinkling eyes. He appeared Rohav Risuan permanently beamed in his eyes. The bookseller brought into Rehouse rar aura of guinea fowl, turkeys, sheep and goats, all of which he raised in his abundant compound. The sheep were always being rounded up. Either gates bad been left carelessly open by a visitor, or stubborn animals had found you another gap in srown and mud walls. The inn and peppery, leer her raw cheekbones, roosa our restlessly. He punkuad his discours were bird-like gestures. Even though his moser aggressive, his shoulders slouched. His fingers refused to release cloth cap, which, outside, never left his head, perhaps because he was completely bald. We cooled rel his laughter apart, shrill and raspy, revealing gapped rear which imparted row his face, finally the look of an old wicker chair. The bookseller's wife was one of our many mothers. If we had taken a Voron question, she would be in forefront of all others, including our real one. We're a bovine boti, ger-black skin and inexhaustible goodness. She nevertheless purred disquieting roofers in my head, and all because of her husband. By contrast, Ro, him she was ample, and sometimes when Rebuxel Lear disappeared for days, I feel certain Ra she had just swallowed him up. Lear was a great relief, Ra. I would encounter his bald head bobbing about in animation somewhere in his house or in our HE bookshop. Of all women on whose backs I was carried, none was as secure and comfortable as Mrs. B's. Law was capacious, sofa and reassu ring. Our radiated same repose and kindliness Ra we had observed in her face. We slept her in our booksellers. Mrs. B would send a maid Ro inform our house Ra we would ear and sleep a rare own house for the night. And Ra was Ra. When we got into trouble, we ran behind her and she shielded us. No, I rake bearing on myself. Wild Christian ride row reach round her were re-stick. Burr there was simply rue much of her. Unless re-offence was particularly serious, ha was re-end of re-mara. Her only daughter Bukola was Nor of our world. When we threw our voices against the school walls of Lower Parsonage and listened row them echo from a long distance, it seemed row me that Bukola was one of the denizens, of that other world where the voice was caught, sieved, respun and cast back in diminishing copies. Amulets, bangles, tiny rattles and dark copper wrist rings eaned her through ankles, fingers, wrists and wazer. She knew she was a bicket. The Ardabuyeo tiny cicatrices on her face were also part of the many counters row enticements by her companions. In the other world, like all Abikit, she was privileged, a pan. Her parents dared not scold her for long or earnestly. Suddenly her eyes would turn inwards, showing nothing but the whites. She would do it for our benefit whenever we asked her. Tinu shrewd at a distance, ready to ruin away. Somehow she expected terrible things to follow. I asked Bukola, "Can you see when you do that with your eyes?" "Only darkness." "Do you remember anything of the other world?" "No, but that is where I go when I fall in a trance." "Can you fall into a trance now?" From her safe distance, Tinu threatened to report row our parents if I encouraged her. Bukola merely replied that she could, but only if I was sure I could call her back. I was not very sure I could do that. Looking at her, I wondered how Mrs. B coped with such a supernatural being who died, was reborn, died again, and kept going and coming as often as she pleased. As we walked, the bells on her anklets jingled, driving off her companions from the other world who pestered her incessantly, pleading that she should rejoin them. "Do you actually hear them?" "Often." "What do they say?" "Simply that I should come and play with them." "Ha. Vent they got anyone row play with? Why do they bother you?" She shrugged. I felt resentful. Bukola was after all our own playmate. Then I had an idea. "Why don't you bring them over here? Next time they call you, invite them to come and play with us in our own compound." She shook her head. "They can do that. Why not? They cannot move as we do, just as you cannot go over there." She was so rare, this privileged being who, unlike Tinu and me, and even her companions in that other place, could pass easily from one sphere to another. I had seen her once during her fainting spell. Her eyes rolled upwards, teeth tightly clenched while her body went limp. Mrs. B kept wailing, "Egbami! Ara eman tutu! Ara eman tutu!" desperately chafing her limbs to bring her back to life. The bookseller ran from the shop through the adjoining door and forced her teeth open. The maid had already snatched a bottle from a cupboard, and together some liquid was forced down her throat. The Ibiku did not immediately regain consciousness, but I could tell after a little while that the danger had passed. The household grew less tense. They stretched her on the bed, and she relaxed totally, her face suffused with an unnatural beauty. We sat beside her, Tinu and I, watching until she woke. Her mother then made her drink some light fish soup, which she had busied herself preparing while she slept. Normally we would all eat from the same bowl, but this time Mrs. B transferred some of the soup to a smaller pot, to which she then added some thick liquid from a bottle. It was brackish and had a pungent smell. While we spooned up our soup from a separate bowl, Mrs. B held her daughter's head back and made her drink her own soup in one go. Bukola evidently expected it. She drank her potion without any complaint. Afterwards, we went out to play. The crisis was completely over. Mrs. B, however, insisted that we remain within their compound. I reminded Bukola of that spell. "Was it your other playmates who called you then?" "I don't remember. But you can do it any time you want." "Yes, especially if my parents do something to annoy me, or the maid." "But how do you do it? How do you actually do it? I know your eyes." It made me uneasy. Mrs. B was too kind a woman to be plagued with such an awkward child. Yet we knew she was not being cruel, and Jikil was that way. They could not help their nature. I thought of all the things Bukola could ask for, things which would be beyond the power of her parents to grant. Suppose one day you ask something they cannot give you, like the A Lakes motor car. "They have to give me what I ask," she insisted, "but there are things they don't have. Even a king doesn't have everything. The last time it happened I only asked for a Sara. My father refused. He said I had one not so long ago. So I fainted. I was really goemg, Tinu protested. But one cannot have a Sara every day. I don't have a Rara every day. She persisted. And the Sara I asked for that time was not for me. It was for my companions. They told me that if I couldn't come to play with them just yet, I should make them Arjara. I told my mother, and she agreed, but father refused. She shrugged. That is what happens when the grown-ups refuse to understand. Papa had to kill an extra fowl because it took longer than usual for me to come back. Her oval, solemn face changed from innocence to authority as she spoke. I watched her intently, wondering if she was scheming another departure. Natural as it all seemed, there was also a vague disquiet that this was too much power for a child to wield over her parents. I went over all the faces at the Sara, the movement of food and drinks, the sudden disputes that rose as we ate, and the peacemaking voices of the grown-ups. Nothing unusual appeared to have happened. H had been a Sara like any other. We sat in groups on mats spread out in the garden, all in outing dresses. Bukala especially gorgeously dressed. Her eyes were deeply marked in antimony, and her face powdered. She ate at our mat from the same dish. There was nothing otherworldly about her. Certainly I had not seen her giving food secretly to unseen companions. Yet the Sara was for them. I wondered sometimes if Mr. B took refuge in our house to escape the tyranny of this child. Fond of arguments as father was on any subject on earth or in heaven, it was the Buxel who usually prolonged their disputations far into the night. He would worry the dead flesh of an argument with hawk-like talons, conceding a point, with the greatest reluctance, only to return to a position long discarded or overtaken by new arguments. Even I could tell that, and the exaggerated patience in S.A.'s voice only served to confirm it, and sometimes their arguments took frightening turns. One day the bookseller, Forwoken, the junior headmaster of the primary school, the catechist, and one other of S.A.'s cronies followed him home from church service. Osibo, the pharmacist, enjoyed sitting on these sessions, but took a little part in them. Their voices had long preceded them into the house. They were all hotly wrapped in the debate, talking all at once and refusing to yield a point. It went on, right through bottles of warm beer and soft drinks, exhausted Wild Christian's stock of chin-chien and sweet biscuits, and carried over into lunch. Even as she shook her head in despair at these friends of your father, wondering why he always managed to attract to himself friends with such stomachs for arguments and food, it was obvious that Wild Christian enjoyed the role played by the headmaster's house as the intellectual watering hole of Ache and its environs. Towards late afternoon, tea and sandwiches or cakes refuel led their vocal powers for the final rally, for by then it was approaching the hour of evening service, and they all had to return home for a change of clothing. It was usually at this time that Bukola's father seemed in the greatest danger. The arguments would take a physical turn with the bookseller, always the bookseller, about to be made the sacrificial proof of some point of disagreement. My loyalty to his wife created a terrible dilemma. I felt it was my duty to run and warn her that her husband was about to be sold into slavery, banished from Abeokuta, dropped from an aeroplane, hurled from the church tower, tied to a tree in the dead of night alone with evil spirits, sent on an investigatory mission to hell or on a peace mission to Hitler. Always some dangerous consequence of a going argument, and the only way they would all decide in which it could be resolved. That day, these friends actually wanted to cut off one of Mr. B's limbs. "All right, shall I tell Joseph to sharpen the cutlass?" The argument had started from that morning's sermon. It had gone 100 different ways at different times, and as usual, the Buxel gesticulating arms had fanned the embers back to life when every point had been exhausted. Now he seemed about to lose the arm. Still, he fought back. He always did. "Did I tell you that my right arm had offended me?" Amidst laughter, and this was the strangest pan, they always laughed, S.A. called out to Joseph to bring the cut ass. Mr. Falcon offered, or an axe, whichever is sharper. Mr. B's hands flapped about even more desperately. "Wait, Wale, did I tell you that my arm had offended me?" "Are you now saying that you are without sin?" the catechist countered. No. But who is to say definitely that it was my hand which commued the sin? And which arm are you going to cut off, left or right? Well, my father gave the manner some thought. You are left-handed, so the probability is that your left hand commued the sin, Joseph. Not so fast. Let's go over God's injunction again. If thine right hand offendeth thee. My father sighed. Today is a Sunday, God's own day. Imagine you are standing before him. You are his servant, a respected sidesman in his church at St. Peter's. I insist that Christ's injunctions are meant to be taken literally. All right. God is now asking you, has your right hand ever offended thee, yes or no? It was the son of language which frightened me even more than the violence about to be visited on the bookseller. My father had the habit of speaking as if he was on first-name terms with God. Why should he suggest that God would come into our front room just to prosecute the bookseller? I expected any moment a visitation worse than the bookseller would ever experience from this unequal contest. Tinu SL ipped away. The crowd in the front room were laughing at the bookseller who struggled furiously, especially with his voice. Their laughter made it all the more wicked. SA scraped the cutlass along the concrete floor and advanced one step. The bookseller suddenly wriggled free, flung open the door and escaped. Yelling after him, "Catch him," they all dispersed, remembering to fling back their thanks to Wild Christian for the Sunday feast. I dashed through the dining room and the bior, backyard to our gate so I could watch the chase through the parsonage. It ended where the paths separated, one towards the bookseller's compound, the other to the parsonage gate through which the others would regain their own homes. Their laughter rang through the compound as they waved goodbye to one another. I did not appreciate their levity in the least, feeling too deeply thankful that Mrs. B would not have to cope with a one-armed husband in addition to that willful Abiku. Every morning before I woke up, Tinu was gone. She returned about midday, carrying a slate with its marker attached to it, and she was dressed in the same khaki uniform as the hordes of children, of different sizes, who milled around the compound from morning till afternoon, occupied in 100 ways. At a set hour in the morning, one of the bigger ones seized the chain which dangled from the Belle house, tugged at it with a motion which gave the appearance of a dance, and the Belle began pealing. Instantly, the various jostling, tumbling, racing and fighting pupils rushed in different directions around the school buildings, the smaller in size towards the schoolroom at the further end of the compound, where I could no longer see them. The bigger pupils remained within sight near the main building. They split into several groups, each group lined up under the watchful eye of a teacher. When all was orderly, I saw Father appear from nowhere at the top of the steps. He made a speech to the assembly, then stood aside. One member of the very biggest group stepped forward and raised a song. The others took it up, and they marched into the school building in twos to the rhythm of the song. The song changed every day, chosen from the constant group of 5 or 6. That I came to have a favorite among them was because this was the same one which they sang with more zest than others. I noticed that on the days when it was the turn of this tune they danced rather than marched. Even the teachers seemed affected. They had an indulgent smile on their faces, and would even point out a pupil who on a certain charged beat in the tune would dip his shoulders in a most curious way yet march without breaking the rhythm. It was an unusual song too. CNC, the main song, was in English, but the chorus was sung in Yoruba. I could only catch the words of the latter. I never heard any such lively singing from the other school. Indeed, that group simply vanished from sight. Yet this was where my sister went. I never saw her anywhere among the marching group. In any case, there was nobody her size in that section. My curiosity grew every day. She sensed this and played on it, refusing to answer my questions, or else throwing off incomplete fragments which only fed my curiosity. "I am going to school," I announced one day. It became a joke to be passed from mouth to mouth, producing instant guffaws. Mother appeasingly said, "Wait till you are as old as your sister." The hum of voices, once the pupils were within the buildings, took mysterious overtones. Through the open windows of the schoolroom I saw heads in concentration, the majestic figure of a teacher who passed in and out of vision, mumbling incantations over the heads of H's attentive audience. Different chants broke out from different parts of each building. Sometimes there was even direct singing accompanied by a harmonium. When the indoor rites were over, they came out in different groups, played games, ran races. They spread over the compound picking up litter, sweeping the paths, clipping lawns and weeding flower beds. They roamed about with hoes, cutlasses, brooms and sticks, retired into open workshop sheds where they wove baskets, carved bits of wood and bamboo, kneaded clay and transformed them into odd-shaped objects. Under the anxious eyes of Auntie Lawanle, I played by myself on the pavement of our house and observed these varied activities. The tools of the open air were again transformed into books, exercise books, slates, books under armpits, in their little tin or wooden boxes, books in raffia bags, tied together with string and carried on the head, slung over shoulders in cloth pouches. Directly in front of our home was the lawn, which was used exclusively by girls from the other school. They formed circles, chased one another in and out of the circles, struggled for a ball, and tossed it through an iron hoop stuck on a board. Then they also vanished into classrooms, books were produced, and they commenced their own observances of the mystery RNs. Tinu became even more smug. My erstwhile playmate had emerged a new world, and though we still played together, she now had a new terrain low draw upon. Every morning she was woken earlier than I, scrubbed, fed and led school by one of the older children of the house. My whys and games soon palled, but the laughter still rankled, so I no longer demanded that I join Tinu in school. Instead, I got up one morning as she was being woken up, demanded my bath at the same time, ate, selened the clothing which I thought came closest with the uniforms I had seen, and insisted on being dressed in them. I had marked down a number of books on Father's table, but did not yet remove them. I waited in the from room. When Tinu passed through with her escon, I let them leave the house, waited a few moments, then seized the books I had earlier selened, and followed them. Both params were still in the dining room. I followed at a discreet distance so I was not noticed. We arrived at the infam school. I waited at the door, watched where Tinu was seated, then went and climbed on Lo the bench, beside her. Only then did Lawanle, Tinu's escon that day, see me. She let out a cry of alarm and asked me what I thought I was doing. I ignored her. The teachers heard the commotion and came into the room. I appeared to be everybody's object of fun. They looked at me, poemed, and they held their sides, rocked forwards and backwards with laughter. A man who appeared low be in charge of the Inafam section next came in. He was also our father's friend and came often lo the house. I recognized him, and I was pleased that he was not laughing with the others. Instead, he swode in from of me and asked, "Have you come lo, keep your sister company?" I know, I have come lo school. I looked at him in some astonishment, not feel like coming to school. The colored maps, pictures and other hangings on the walls, the colored counters, markers, slates, inkwells in neat round holes, crayons and drawing books, a shelf laden with modeled objects, animals, human beings, implements, raffia and basketwork in various stages of completion, even the blackboards, chalk and duster. I had yet to see a more inviting playroom. In addition, I had made some vague intuitive connection between school and the piles of books with which my father appeared to commune so religiously in the front room, and which had constantly to be snatched from me as soon as my hands grew long enough to reach them on the table. "I shall come every day," I confidently declared. Mr. Olagbaju's bachelor house behind the school became a second lunch-hour home. His favorite food appeared to be the pounded yam, iyan, at which I soon became his keen accomplice. Through the same iyan, I made my first close school friend Osiki, simply by discovering that he was an even more ardent lover of the pounded yam than either Mr. Olagbaju or I. It seemed a simple matter of course that I should take him home or to Mr. Olagbaju's whenever the meal was iyan. Moreover, Mr. Olagbaju was also teaching me to play ayo, and this required a partner to play with. It was with some surprise that I heard my mother remark, "This one is going to be like his father. He brings home friends at meal times without any notice." I saw nothing to remark in it at all. It was the most natural thing in the world to bring a friend home at his favorite meal time. So Osiki became an inseparable companion and a regular feature of the house, especially on iyan days. One of the house helps composed a song on him. Osiki oko onian atinwa e, akori e, which she began singing as soon as we appeared, hand in hand, on the path leading from the school. But the pounded yam was also to provide the further test of our friendship. There were far too many aspects of the schoolroom and the compound to absorb in the regular school hours, moreover. An empty schoolroom appeared to acquire a totally different character which changed from day to day. And so, new discoveries began to keep me behind at lunchtime after everyone had gone. I began to stay longer and longer, pausing over objects which became endowed with new meanings, forms, even dimensions, as soon as silence descended on their environment. Sometimes I simply wandered off among the rocks, intending merely to climb a chow-lenging surface when no one was around. Final lie, Osiki lost patience. He would usually wait for me at home even while Tinu had her own food. On this day, however, being perhaps more hungry than usual, Osiki decided not to wait. Afterwards, he tried to explain that he had only meant to eat half of the food, but had been unable to stop himself. I returned home to encounter empty dishes and was just in time to see Osiki disappearing behind the croton bush in the backyard. Meaning no doubt to escape through the rear gate, I rushed through the parlor and the front room, empty dishes in hand, hid behind the door until he came past, then pelted him with the dishes. A chase followed, with Osiki instantly in front, by almost the full length of the school compound, while I followed doggedly, inconsolable at the sight of the increasing gap. Yet unable to make my legs emulate Osiki's pace. Finally, I stopped. I no longer saw Osiki but speed, swiftness. I had not given any thought before then to the phenomenon of human swiftness, and Osiki's passage through the compound seemed little. Short of the magical, the effect of his dansiki, which flowed like wings from H, his sides also added to the illusion of him flying over the ground. This, more than anything else, made it easy enough for the quarrel to be settled by my mother. It was very difficult to tut oneself off from a school friend who could fly at will from one end of the compound to the other. Even so, some weeks elapsed before he returned to the pounded yam table, only to follow up his perfidy by putting me out of school for the first time in my career. There was a birthday party for one of the canon's children. Only the children of the parsonage were expected, but I passed the secret to Osiki, and he turned up at the party in his best booba. The entertainments had been set up out of doors in front of the house. I noticed that one of the benches was not properly placed, so that it acted like a seesaw when we sat on it close to the two ends. It was an obvious idea for a game, so, with the help of some of the other children, we carried it to an even more uneven ground, rested its middle leg on a low rock outcrop and turned it into a proper seesaw. We all took turns to ride on it. For a long time it all went without mishap. Then Osiki got carried away. He was a bigger boy than I, so that I had to exert a lot of energy to raise him up, lifting myself on both hands and landing with all possible weight on my seat. Suddenly, while he was up in his turn, it entered his head to do the same. The result was that I was catapulted up very sharply, while he landed with such force that the leg of the bench broke on his side. I was flung in the air, sailed over. His head and saw for one long moment, the canon's square residents rushing out to meet me. It was only after I had landed that I took much notice of what I had worn to the party. It was a yellow silk dansiki, and I now saw with some surprise that it had turned a bright crimson, though not yet entirely, but the remaining yellow was rapidly taking on the new color. My hair on the left side was matted with blood and dirt, and just before the afternoon was shut out and I fell asleep, I wondered if it was going to be possible to squeeze the blood out of the dansiki and pump it back through the gash which I had located beneath my hair. The house was still and quiet when I woke up. One moment there had been the noise, the shouts and laughter, and the bumpy ride of the seesaw, now silence and semi-darkness and the familiar walls of Mother's bedroom. Despite mishaps, I reflected that there was something to be said for birthdays, and began to look forward to Emine. My only worry now was whether I would have recovered sufficiently to go to school and invite all my friends. Sending Tinu seemed a risky business. She might choose to invite all her friends and pack my birthday with girls I hardly even knew or played with. Then there was another worry. I had noticed that some of the pupils had been kept back in my earlier class, and were still going through the same lessons as we had all learnt during my first year in school. I developed a fear that if I remained too long at home, I would also be sent back to join them. When I thought again of all the blood I had lost, it seemed to me that I might actually be bedridden for the rest of the year. Everything depended on whether or not the blood on my dansiki had been saved up and restored to my head. I raised it now and turned towards the mirror. It was difficult to rotel because of the heavy bandage burr. I felt quite certain that my head had nor shrunk any alarming degree. The bedroom door opened and Mother peeped in. Seeing me awake, she entered, and was followed in by Father. When I asked for Osiki, she gave me a peculiar look and turned to say something to Father. I was not sure, but it sounded as if she wanted Father to tell Osiki that killing me was not going to guarantee him my share of Ian. I studied their faces intently as they asked me how I felt, if I had a headache or a fever, and if I would like some tea. Neither would touch on the crucial question. So finally I decided Ro put an end to my suspense. I asked them what they had done with my dansiki. "It's going to be washed," Mother said, and began Ro crush a half-tablet in a spoon for me Ro rake. "What did you do with the blood?" She stopped. They looked at each other. Father frowned a little and reached forward Ro, placed his hand on my forehead. I shook my head anxiously, ignoring the throb of pain this provoked. "Have you washed it away?" I persisted. Again they looked at each other. Mother seemed about to speak, but fell silent as my father raised his hand and sat on the bed close to my head. Keeping his eyes on me, he drew out a long, "No, oh. I sank back in relief. "Because, you see, you mustn't. It wouldn't matter. If I had merely cut my hand or stubbed my toe or something like that, not much blood comes out when that happens. But I saw this one. It was much. And it comes from my head, so you must squeeze it out and pump it back into my head. That way I can go back to school at once." My father nodded agreement, smiling. "How did you know that was the right thing to do?" I looked at him in some surprise, but everybody knows. Then he wagged his finger at me. "Aha, but what you don't know is that we have already done it. It's all back in there while you were asleep. I used Depot's feeding bottle to pour it back." I was satisfied. "Till be ready for school tomorrow," I announced. I was kept home another 3 days. I resumed classes with my head still swathed in a bandage and proceeded to inform my favorite classmates that the next important event in the parsonage was going to be my birthday, still some months away. Birthdays were not new. I had shared one with Tinu the previous year, and even little Depot had had H's first year of existence confirmed a few weeks before the fateful one at the Canon's house. But now, with the daily dressing of my head prolonging the aura of the last, the birthday acquired a new status, a special and personal significance which I assumed was recognized by everyone. Indeed, I thought that this was a routine knowledge into which one entered in the normal way of growing up. Understanding the functioning of the calendar became part of the order of birthdays, and I dutifully watched Essay cancel one date after the other on the Ibukun Olu store's 1938 almanac alias the Blessed Jacob, the alias of which was printed, for some reason, in a slanting form, rather like my father's handwriting. All was ready on the 13th of July. I headed home after school with about a dozen of the favored friends, led by Osiki. They all stacked their slates in the front room and took over the parlor. On the faces of the guests, everyone on H's best behavior, was a keen anticipation of food and drinks, of some music from the gramophone and games and excitement. Now that they were home, I became a little uncertain of my role as celebrant and host. Still, I took my place among the others and awaited the parade of good things. We had settled down for a while before I noticed the silence of the house. Essay was still at school. Mother was obviously at her shop with Depot, who would probably be strapped to the back of Auntie Lawanle. But where were the others? Come to think of it, I had expected Mother to be home to welcome my friends, even if she had to go back to the shop to attend to her customers. It occurred to me also that Tinu had not come home at all. Perhaps she went straight to the shop. She was considered old enough by now to do this on her own. That looked promising. Any moment now I expected our mother to rush through the doors, making up for the delay with all sons of unexpected delights. I went out to the backyard. expecting to find at least one of our cousins or detect signs of preparations for the birthday. There was nobody. The kitchen was empty and there was no aroma from recent cooking. I called out, announcing that I was home with guests, and where was everybody? Real life puzzled now, I returned to the dining room, inspected the cupboards. The table beyond the usual items, there was nothing at all. No jars of chin-chin, no akara, no glasses or mugs obviously set aside, no pancakes. Jollof rice? There was simply nothing out of the ordinary. This was not how birthdays normally behaved, but there did not seem to be any cause for alarm. I checked the date on El Bukunolu stores once more, satisfied myself that there was no mistake, then settled down with my guests to wait for birthday to happen. My mother rushed in not long afterwards, Depot strapped to her back, Auntie Lawanl and others following, carrying the usual assorted items which accompanied them to the shop every morning. This was impressive because it meant that the shop had been closed for the day and it was still early afternoon. Obviously, birthday was really about to happen in earnest, but she came in shaking her head and casting up her eyes in a rather strange manner. She stopped in the parlor, took a long look at my friends, looked at me again, shook her head repeatedly, and passed through to the kitchen, from where I heard her giving rapid orders to the welcome ring of pots and pans and the creak of the kitchen door. I nodded with satisfaction to the guests and assured them, "The birthday is beginning to come." A moment later, Tinu came in to say I was wanted by Mother in the kitchen. I found her with her arms elbow-deep in flour, which she was kneading as if possessed. Without taking her eye off the dough, she began, "Now, Wole, tell me, what have your friends come for?" Geisa was a strange question, but I replied, "We've come to ear birthday." "You came to ear birthday," she repeated. For some reason, Lawanli and the others had already burst out laughing. Mother continued, "Do you realize that you and your friends would still be sirring in that parlor, waiting to eat your birthday? If Tinu hadn't come and told me. But today is my birthday," I pointed out Roha. Patiently, she explained, "No one is denying that. I had planned Ned to cook something special tonight, Burr. Look, you just don't invite people home without letting us know. How was I to know? You were bringing friends? Now look at us rushing around. Your friends have been sirring there, nearly starving to death, and you say you've brought them to ear birthday. You see, you have to let people know." The birthday proved to be all that was expected, once it had got over the one disappointing limitation. Birthday did not just happen, but needed to be reminded to happen. That aspect of IRS character bothered me for a while. It was a shortcoming, for which I tried to find excuses without success. The birthday lost a lot in stature after this, almost as if it had slid down from the rays, the end of that fateful seesaw, to the lower end, and landed in a heap among other humdrum incidents. In the parsonage. Still, it had added the calendar to my repertoire of knowledge. When it came to my turn to entertain the gathering, I sang Ogbon, Joni September April, June ati November February, ni meji din logbon, awon yoku leokan logbon. The others took it up Osiki, supplying a kokotikoko beat on the table so fluently that my mother asked him jokingly if he had been drumming for the masqueraders. To everybody's surprise, he said, "Yes, they're Agbole." He revealed even possessed Iti's own mask, which paraded the town with others at the yearly festival of the Agungun. When Osiki promised to lead their Agungun on a visit to our house at the next festival, I could not help feeling that the Bee Earth Day had more than made up for its earlier shortcoming. I had watched them before over the wall of the backyard, seated on Joseph's shoulders. I knew that the Agungun were spirits of the dead. They spoke in guttural voices and were to be feared even more than kidnappers. And yet I had noticed that many of them were also playful and would joke with children. I had very nearly been startled off Joseph's shoulders once when one of them passed directly beneath the wall, looked up and waved, calling out in the familiar throaty manner, "Nye-o, omo tisa agba." But Joseph explained that it was only natural that the dead should know all about the living ones. After all, they once lived like us, and that friendly one might even have been in the compound before. Now, discovering that Osiki had an Agungun, which emerged from their compound, every year was almost the same as if we also had one of our own. We crowded round him, and I asked if he knew which of his dead ancestors it was. He shook his head. "I only know it is one of our ancient people." Are you actually there when he emerges from the bottom of the earth?